So what AWS or Amazon Web Services is a infrastructure as a service. So essentially where traditionally a data center had an infrastructure on which workloads were running that was owned and operated by a company, an organization, instead that infrastructure is being provided as a service on Amazon EC2. So you'll hear people refer to it as AWS or just Amazon or EC2. The utility of it is that companies can take advantage of a scale of architecture that they often can't do within their own data center simply because of the scale of the investment. So that allows companies to do a lot of different things that are not available to them on their own dime, essentially. And there's also potential for cost savings. And that's especially the result of the model being that essentially one is renting computing power from AWS. So when you don't need that computing power, you don't pay for it. So instead of having to scale an environment and pay for an environment that is built to the peaks of usage, one really pays with the peaks or the valleys, thereby saving when performance goes into a valley. It really runs the gamut. What we're seeing as early adopters especially are organizations that are putting what can be thought of as non-essential workloads onto AWS. So in the beginning that was a lot of development shops, QA, quality assurance, or performance testing shops, where simply put, buying that infrastructure to test the performance of a particular solution or product that is being bought once a year makes no sense from a capital cost perspective. So for those types of companies, going with AWS makes a ton of sense. Another group are SMBs, small to medium-sized businesses, where again, the initial capital costs of investing in, say, an Exchange server, a piece of hardware, managing that hardware, powering that hardware, makes no sense, and it's very quick, very cost effective to go to AWS and take advantage of that. The third, and what I would consider today perhaps the most aggressive group, are definitely IT companies themselves. So consider a software as a service company. If they need to go from having 10,000 users on a particular day, they sign a big contract and they need to provision 20,000 new users, that means they're essentially tripling the size of their infrastructure. In a traditional environment, that could take months to do. In something like public cloud, AWS, that can be done in a day or two at most. What companies tend to do is they look at AWS from a security perspective, and they treat it the same way that they treat their data center, which is, or security within their data center, which is unfortunately not a good practice for several different reasons. But generally there is an impression that public cloud computing, because one doesn't control the infrastructure, is inherently less secure than a privately owned or in-house owned data center. And simply put, that's not necessarily true. What is true is that an organization that has plenty of security problems in their own data center, that does not have good security practices, is going to experience the exact same security problems in public cloud. So the best way to approach the security issue, given that there are differences in how the platform works, is to really adjust to those differences. And that can mean re-architecting the security solution. But quite often, it comes down to simple things like licensing and billing. So for instance, with endpoint security specifically, it doesn't make sense to purchase a license for the maximum number of AMIs, the actual instances on AWS that one would need, because when going into a performance valley, the number of AMIs that are required will also decrease. But that license, if using a traditional endpoint security license, you're essentially paying for that peak across the entire time. So one needs billing and licensing that is on demand, that is usage based, and fits with the AWS cost model itself, so that when paying Amazon less for less computing power, you're also paying your security vendor less for less computing power. So what Bitdefender has done is taken a solution that was built specifically for virtualized environments, a solution that, strangely enough, is called Security for Virtualized Environments, and essentially placed that solution on AWS and integrated it with certain APIs of AWS that make management much easier than with a traditional solution. So one of the advantages that we have in the design of SVE, as we call it, is that it is agnostic of the underlying hypervisor that is being used for virtualization. So that's the first important point, that we're able to take that technology and do some quick and frankly pretty simple, on the technology side, integration with AWS to improve management, because there are simple problems that are not anticipated by traditional security. Traditional security basically assumes that the environment is quite stable and quite static in the number of systems coming and leaving. With virtualization, whether private or public cloud, those environments are highly dynamic. And so, simply put, if the management console hangs on to systems forever and doesn't understand how that environment is changing over time, management becomes a tremendous burden. Another area that is perhaps even more significant than that integration with AWS is on the billing side. So as I mentioned, when fewer AMIs are required, that means a lower cost to Amazon, and it should also mean, frankly, paying Bitdefender less money. And so we charge hourly, exactly like AWS does. It's therefore usage-based billing, and it's included in the invoice from Amazon. Now, customers with more static environments, for instance, a large enterprise that has a project running on AWS that will be sustained over multiple years and is using what are called reserved instances, or instances that are paid up front, of course we can still provide the bring your own license model and accommodate that. So it's really about flexibility and fitting with the AWS model, rather than trying to bolt on traditional security after the fact. One of our most interesting Bitdefender customers on AWS is a company called Focus IT. They're a US-based finance company. Essentially, they are a software as a service company providing software around mortgage applications. What's really interesting about them is they have had a highly virtualized data center for quite a long time. They were initially quite aggressive with virtualizing their data center, but at some point, being a SaaS, they understood one of their problems is they're not realizing the benefits of usage-based billing. And also, if they wish to expand across the country, that would involve setting up perhaps a new data center in New York, for instance, which means, again, a high initial capital cost. What they can do with AWS, and what they are doing in moving eventually their entire infrastructure onto AWS, is taking advantage of the existing AWS infrastructure to be able to spin up instances wherever and whenever they need them, and also, once they achieve full automation, also spinning down instances, so that once again they're paying AWS less money than they need to, and paying Bitdefender less money, which is a good thing all around.